especially with this weather. I really appreciate it. And thank you for inviting me here to speak about my book, Mobilization and the Turkish Studies program. So, I'm happy to speak about this book, which took me almost 14 years to complete the fieldwork and the research. And the cover that you see here is one of the photographs that I took. I will be talking about that sculpture, which is a sculpture that doesn't exist anymore. After 2016, it was demolished. So it was very important for me to put the Romoski memorial on the cover of the book so it can have a lot of life there. So I begin this research with two questions. And I was curious, and I'm still curious, what role do cities play in the struggles for justice and equality in the 21st century? The second question is, in what ways do architectural and urban forms enable political mobilization among marginalized communities and ethnic minorities? And I know many of you know where the Diyarbakır is, and here is the Diyarbakır. I picked Diyarbakır because it is one of the most Kurdish populated city, but as you all know that the Kurds are not only located in the southeast part of Turkey, there are actually more Kurds, we can say, in Istanbul and the rest of the country living. But why the city? It was one of my interviews with Osman Baydemir. Back then, he was the mayor of Diyarbakır, and his words explained so well why city matters. And he said, inside the parliamentary system, you may have 20 or 30 parliament members, but in general legislation, you don't have the power to change the law. But through local authorities, you have the power to change the spirit of the city, its people. The city is yours, the city board is yours, the municipality is yours. So of course the name of the book is coming from these codes, the city is ours. So in conducting research, enabled me to develop an ethnography of urban maneuvers, I called it, because I had to combine multiple different levels of research methods. So one is, I conducted in-depth fieldwork conducted between 27 and 2023, over 28 months. In 2010, I stayed in the city for 10 months, and for the rest of the years, I went back and forth, and during those times, I engaged participant observation in the municipalities, in the municipal halls, in the municipal meetings, city planning meetings, architecture meetings, NGOs, cultural sites, homes, real estate offices, and the street protests. And during this period of time, I conducted over 150 interviews with mayors, city officials, activists, community leaders, architects, and planners. What was very valuable for me to observe the trajectory of their positionality over the years and their activism, their activities and events. So I had a chance to interview with new people, but at the same time with the same people, same architects between 2007 and 2023 to see how, in the face of state pressure and coercion, how they also navigate their way. It was valuable for me to observe these changes. And I also conducted, as an architect, spatial analysis, and I created urban transformation maps, documented buildings and urban sites, over 1,000 images. I'm grateful that I documented many of those memorials which were demolished after 2015. And it also allowed me to compare what was before and what is after 2015. So this research in the book allowed me to think about the city in a way that I came up with this concept, what I call wiggle room. Because in the urban studies literature, we urban planners and architectural historians take the city and has a tendency to see the city as a top-down process. But wiggle room refers to capacity of urban spaces to create urban opportunities for resilience and mobilization. That was the question that I had been always curious about. And it embodies the potentials of these spaces to become sites of engagement, places where people can maneuver, build solidarity, and resist injustices. By urban opportunities, I mean they encompass a variety of strategies that empower citizens, creating broader possibilities for collective action and opposition. So I was not only interested in protest movements, but I also looked at other urban actions and activities where people can find space for mobilization and resistance. So the book takes from one urban scale to another, and in different chapters I focus on different built environment, but in one chapter I focus on monuments and memorials, in another chapter I focus on housing practices. And so today I'm going to give an overview, but I want to focus on two areas, one housing, and another one is public space, monuments and memorials. So this is the city, and I don't know if this is, at number one, what you see is the souk. That is the historic core of Diyarbakır. That's an ancient city. It is the walled city. And this number 1, 2, 3, and 4 shows us the urban growth. Or if you ask why, the upper right corner and the left is empty, not growth, because it was because of the state on land and the military land almost squeezed the city and forced the city to grow in that manner. And if we look at the city in every historic phase, matched with another political agenda in the city. So this is Kayapınar, and this is one of the most urban developing areas currently also. So in the city, in this chapter, whose city building the frontier and we will not surrender, I focused on the case of housing, right? And since the 2009, the Turkish government, the Ankara, wanted to intervene to soothe the historic core. And they wanted to relocate the urban migrants from Sur to the very outskirts of the city. It's way further away, and one of the reasons governor of Diyarbakır at that time told me, I was interviewing also with him, he was very conscious about political mobilization in the city, especially what's in Sur, and said, okay, we have to end this. Once we move them outside of the city, he was explicit telling, it will be harder for them to politically mobilize. And in the face of this, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the creativity, the wiggle room that I am discussing in the book. In the face of this, Kurdish municipalities in the city, what did they do? So this is an image from Sur on the right side that you're seeing on the left. That's a typical public housing project where the governor wanted to relocate at the outskirts of the city with Kurdish migrants, and that is the site of that map. So the creativity the municipality put all the efforts and take the advantage of law, urban law, and find the loopholes in that law to fight against the central government, the Ankara. And they organize, they say, okay, wait a second. The urban planning is our side, not the governor's role. So we will be the one who is going to rehabilitate and restore and conduct urban regeneration. So in between 2009 and 12, they were managed to stop Turkey. They were managed to, this is the mass housing developer of Turkey, they were managed to stop government's intervention in the city. But in 2012, government seeing this changed the law and begin to intervene in the city. I'm going to come back to this. I'm just going to give you a background. For now, let's remember, municipality, by using the urban law, stopped for a while government's intervention. But there was something else also interesting going on. While the municipality was keeping or putting every effort to keep the urban migrants and the rural migrants inside the squatter settlements, because the Sur was mostly squatter settlements and informal housing, they put a lot of effort also modernize the rest of the city. From an urban planner perspective, this approach of pro-Kurdish municipalities to squatter settlements presents a puzzle. Because if you look at the world cases, typical scenario is the mayors, the municipalities intervene to demolish squatter settlements, to demolish informal housing, and they themselves to relocate informal settlers to public housing projects, because that's something lucrative. But in the Kurdish municipality case, it was, of course, they had strong ties with them. So that is the little puzzle there. So I asked why have pro-Kurdish municipalities wanted to keep squatter settlements, gecekonus, in the middle of the city, historic core. And unlike several other cases around the world in which municipalities work to end urban informality in the city, the municipality of Diyarbakır in fact wanted to sustain just conditions, but precisely in that historic district. So it took me to find out how they worked so close, very, very close with the squatter settlers, through everyday life practices, through NGOs, and how they support local women organizations, local vocational courses, and everything. Because squatter settlements, both socially and physically, allow the pro-Kurdish part of the municipality to fill in the blanks between urban institutions, spaces, society, and action. So they were in the mobilization platform, they were very, very, very valuable. The book talks a lot of anecdotes about these, but of course I'm going to pass to another area where I also focus, from housing to memorial landscape. This is a picture I took. This was one of the Nevroz days, and they were walking from Nevroz side, which was back then outside of the city, but now it's in Kayapınar, but now it became part of the city, towards Sur, the historic core. As we can see, they are walking, crowds, shoulder to shoulder, the mayors and the parliament members. So in this chapter, I focus on how is national identity articulated through memorial landscapes in the absence of that very much understood way of what we call nation state. So I looked at how did pro-Kurdish municipal officers use public space to mobilize Kurdish society, and how did appropriations of public space help establish a collective Kurdish identity and citizenship experience. So I observed festivals and how they changed, for instance, street names, how they also built hundreds of monuments and memorials in the city. And I also was very much interested in the creativity in it. It was not only festivals or Nevros and the colors, but there was also a sense of creativity. This is one of the examples that the book is talking about. So there was always a tension between the governor of Diyarbakır, which is appointed by the state, and the mayors of the city. Mayors are elected, but the governor is appointed. And in this sense, as I briefly talked about, municipalities by law has the power for urban size or urban planning. Governors does not have that power by law, but in Diyarbakır, they did every effort to intervene into urban space. And in the face of this intervention, mayors of Diyarbakır was very creative in exposing that political violence and also sometimes physical violence in a very creative way. That is what I also call the wiggle room. So it is just an example. So in 2008, Diyarbakır municipalities wanted to give Kurdish names to parks, but the governor of Diyarbakır did not let that happen. So as a response, the Diyarbakır municipalities put those banners in every park that they wanted to give a Kurdish name, and they wanted to give in this one the Shilan and Voshna. By the way, these are beautiful Kurdish names. They don't even have any connotation with war or anything. So, and then the note says, the Parliament of Kayapınar municipality named this park Shilan. However, the Diyarbakır governorship rejected this name, ruling number 2012, and they becomes blank parks in the city. So this is one of the urban creativities that I observed. Another one that I wanted to share with you today is the public monuments and memorials. So this Koşulu Park is one of the largest urban parks in Diyarbakır. And in 2008, Diyarbakır Mayor Osman Baydemir commissioned this Right to Life memorial after a bomb incident where nobody claimed it. PKK said, oh, it's not us. The state said, it's not us. But at the end, the bomb exploded by the Koşulu Park, and 11 people died. So that was a major violent incident. So the mayor immediately commissioned local artists. I think this is also something very important. Commissioning local artists is very important, was very important for the Kurdish mayors in this case. And the local artists came with this memorial called it Right to Life. And he said when I interviewed, because he was there at the bomb blast right across the street, and he saw when he came down the mother trying to reach, while she was dying, trying to reach her kids. So this is one of the examples that we see in the city, a very explicit depiction of violence. And this sculpture is accompanied by 2 wall panels. And on the right side, and this is designed by another local artist. And the wall panel depicting the victims of bomb blast, and the name of the children, name carved in the middle, and surrounded by the head reliefs of the people died from the blast. And I took this photo in 2009. Also remember this photo, and I will come back to this picture at the end as well. And this is another wall accompanying depicting the Kurdish society engaged in halal, symbolizing the solidarity. These are the words of the artists, and he says in the middle the Kurdish eye is crying for what is happening. This park was not only a site where people would come picnic, but that was also a site. And that is the importance, how they use these public sites, where they would do press releases, they would do protests. During the Arab Spring, they also installed the park, tents, which some people call it Kurdish Spring, to this park as well. So that park was also one of those parks, urban parks, that was politically very charged. So, but when we talk about memorial landscape, they are not only constituted by symbolic fixed representations of Kurdish identity and culture. Most of the time, this landscape, the monuments, memorials, and the urban space was a source of urban activism, cultivating specific histories and politics. This is another memorial, Uğur Kayman's memorial. This is right in front of the Sulu municipality. And this is behind the Sulu municipality building. This is the historic board that I showed you in the beginning. They have the black flag there because that time their mayor was arrested, so they were protesting. This is Uğur Kayman's memorial. Uğur Kayman is one of the Kurdish kids who was shot to death by a policeman with 13 bullets. So this is a sculpture again designed by a local artist representing the bullets and the death of the child. So this is another memorial I carried to the cover, Roboski Memorial. This is interesting, I want to mention. So the book talks about the monuments and memorials representing the state violence happen in the borders of Turkey, in close proximity to Diyarbakır, right? But this time, especially after 2009, they begin to also bring the state violence outside of Diyarbakır. I think that was very important how they also saw the Kurdish mobilization and Kurdish movement extending, transcending the borders of Diyarbakır. So this is Roboski Memorial when this is also an explicit one when hundreds, like some smugglers were crossing the border, the Turkish jets bombed them, with the claims of they were terrorists. And these are depicting the missiles and the names of the people who died is carved at the bottom, and the missiles are representing the missiles, and in the middle there's a modern figure crying for the Kurdish nation. So these are just examples, but between 2007 and 2015, in small and larger scale, I observed at least 60 monuments and memorials. Like this one size can be this. These are the most remarkable sites that I wanted to share with you. And if you look at these monuments and memorials, they are very explicit. A typical art historian might even say that they are not very aesthetic. They are very aesthetic, they are very explicit, and they are done by the local artists. And when I interviewed with the artist of this memorial, which is a different one from the other ones, he said, even before me saying anything, he said, I know this memorial is ugly. Yeah, but don't you think what is happening to our kids is ugly? So I had to do something very ugly and explicit. So this also summarized very nicely how they also approached to this, representing the violence that they were exposed to, and that was very important for me. So in 2016, by 2015, I don't have the pictures here, but I discussed in detail autonomy in Diyarbakır, like the local, whoever I interviewed with, were coming. They were very confident of themselves. And you could easily see the Kurdistan flags, the posters of guerrillas in exhibition, very explicitly. May 2015, I was there. Then I did some interviews, I went back. There was, I don't want to go into the details of the trench wars, but that war happened. And the Turkish state this time intervened militarily and politically to the city. There was literally a war. I remember I was talking with my friends, and in where that was happening? In Sur. Do you remember that the Sur, the historic district where since 2009 the government wanted to intervene through housing, through relocating, through expropriation? There it was happening. They literally destroyed Sur with bombs, bulldozers, and everything during the war. And it was very quite hard for the Diyarbakırians to live side by side while the war is happening there, and they had to continue their everyday life like the rest of the city. So what happened? I went immediately after the war, and they arrested the mayors this time. And not only the mayors, a lot of politicians and urban planners. So my urban planner friends were appointed to the as a fireman. The head of urban planning office of Diyarbakır Metropolitan City became a fireman. Of course, he didn't become a fireman. He resigned, but this was all a political intervention. The head of cultural affairs was appointed as custodian to a local school. Of course, he also resigned because they were state officials. They went through assignment, and there is something called KHK, but so they appointed, and they were later fired, and they also lost in a way that they would never go back to their jobs. It was a very strategic intervention. So military intervention, bombing, destroying. Political intervention, it was not only the arrests. Okay, Diyarbakır, it was a city with 1.5 million people, and the moment that they arrested, they appointed their own bureaucrats. So the locally elected mayors were gone, and the elected bureaucrats, acting like mayors, arrived. What did that elected mayor do? The first, in a span of 1 week, is a city which has all the problems of infrastructure, everything. They begin to destroy everything that represented Kurdish mobilization associated with Kurdish violence. So this was one of the first. This happened during the first week that they just destroyed. But if you go to this site today, you cannot even see the base. It's a super landscape. So the memory is gone. Like if you don't have these pictures, nobody would even remember. The memory is gone. That is crucial to erasure of that memory. And also this one, they could once they couldn't destroy this one, it was heavy, big, thick, they plastered it. So imagine also the effort that they have been putting in censoring, dealing, and destroying. And they also put they removed the release here, and they blackened out, and they also put the graffiti. And it is not local people. I was curious. Is it local people? No, it was not. That's what they did. And there's another photo there. I didn't share, but it's in the book, that it says in Turkish. I will say first in Turkish, and then I will translate it into English. It says, "Ulan insanlar, hayaller iptal." So it is in the base of the Right to Life movement. So it says, hey, you people, dreams are cancelled. So no more dreams of Kurdistan or Kurdish mobilization. So this is another destruction. Look at this detail. Of course, I am discussing the book, but the moment that they arrived, they did not only destroy the Kurdish memorial landscape, but they also did every effort to Turkify this book. The first thing they put the Turkish flag and all the flags there. And as you can see, you cannot even tell if that memorial, Ulu Kayman's memorial, ever existed there. But the intervention was not only this. They expropriated the whole sur. Remember, in the beginning of my talk, I discussed how they wanted to expropriate a smaller size of sur, relocate people to public housing. This time, they had the chance to expropriate whole the historic district. For what reason? For this reason, they raised down all the local urban fabric. So when I call urban fabric, I must say that the sur is one of the historic medinas, meaning like by urban fabric, it still carried a historical ancient medieval city, surrounded by this wall. And they call sometimes, if I explain, it's like with outlets, labyrinth-like streets, courtyard houses attached together. That's a very typical, that was, even though we are talking about informal squatter settlements, you could easily still feel it. And there was historic houses as well, many. So what there is a reason architectural in urban street. So this was a typical street. So these streets are narrow, they create shadow, they create spaces for social interaction. These are very typical sites. All gone. Not all gone, sorry. They are almost going away. So after this expropriation, Turkey intervened as an urban developer. They raised down the streets and they built a very typical Turkey kind of, I cannot say local, housing and an open shopping mall here. And of course you can see that there are gone pictures and they are selling the house. So what we can discuss later, but the book discusses what happened to those people who were relocated. Some were able to come back, some were able to not. Some were not able to come back. But it would take me 45 minutes to walk from one side of Sur to another because they just destroyed that urban fabric. Now it took me that day, for instance, only 7 minutes to walk from one side to another. This is also a very Haussmannian approach, right? Why I said Haussmann? Because in Paris, after the revolution, all these ideas of grit come with the sense of control and sense of policing the city, you can say. So here, it's not erasure of memory, but also a rise of control and policing the city that you can see. The situation is right now, but I still believe in the cities. And the book doesn't end with really pessimistic. I still believe in the city, the power of cities and placemaking to incite significant social transformation. This is, and for marginalized communities. This is what I have observed between 2007 and 2015. But of course, there is something called war and military intervention, despite the fact that we can still talk about urban opportunities in the bigger room and the creativity that many can conduct in the city. When it comes to war and military intervention, it is very hard to talk about the creativity that I have been talking about, or urban opportunities that I talked about in the book. That's the last message. I am still thinking about it because architectural in urban spaces still says that where political struggles unfold, this is one thing that I learned from the book as I was researching and writing. They really much constitute the very essence of these conflicts. Because why also, the reason why the mayor, appointed mayor, in a span of 1 week destroyed all the memorials, but he should have been busy with many other things. Thank you for this.
Very sobering presentation in any way, is because even though I'm also working on the topic from a different angle, and we assume that we kind of witnessing many things, sometimes we missed a lot of it. So I didn't know that for example, that memorial was removed, the memorial for Roboski massacre. Your presentation also right now sent me back to just a couple of weeks ago what happened in Eşrefiye and El Maksud neighborhoods in Bin Zaid in Aleppo. The interim authorities attacked, and the Kurdish neighborhoods were besieged, and later on they shelled the city without, indiscriminately. And there was a displacement took place, and that all these attacks and everything is kind of seemed to me very connected in a way that where the Kurdish politics found empowerment in changing urban landscapes and the very municipalist political position that they fight for almost 2 decades. It's just, it seems to me that we kind of need to shift our focuses into this even more. From also my work, that is the solidarity work that I am, international solidarity that I'm working on. What's happening, for example, in the municipal level in New York, in another, other landscapes, that there's kind of other hopes being kind of started to cultivate. And the Kurdish movement was at the center of it for 3 decades and being kind of highly neglected. And my question is that how do you think with this new shift historically within the Kurdish movement regarding municipalism, regarding the very focus on the urban landscapes, change the way that we think about self-determination, change the way that we think about claiming political power, despite all these, all these constraints on the concept of self-determination, ethnic, national self-determination, which the Kurdish movement tried to transform it. So I'm curious, what do you think about the municipalist ideology that right now they are fighting for in all this?
Thank you for this question. I must also say that when this very harsh political interventions were happening in Diyarbakır, or not only in Diyarbakır, in all the Kurdish cities, the mayors were arrested and in jail. The Kurdish political party found new mayors to bring the city. When I also call mayors, don't think that only the mayors. They're all the municipal councils, the activists, the planner, everything is like a whole big chunk is arrested. The Kurdish political party, and in 2019 there was another election. They re-elected Kurdish mayors, and in a span of a few months, they were the new mayors. They were re-arrested. So there was a cycle of arresting and appointing. While during these were happening, I must also confess something that I observed. Unfortunately, the rest of the country was watching. The rest of the country was watching. I mean, in Turkish there's AKP, CHP, and the Kurdish party. I did not observe much big support from CHP that time, and they did not very much imagine the same thing would happen to them. So the arrest of mayors became a tradition in Erdogan's authoritarian regime. Then, as you may know already, that now we have seen a new wave of mayor arrests in Istanbul, in in different cities where the CHP mayors are also arrested. So, to answer your question, municipalism was in Turkey was not only limited. The local politics, because when we are talking about municipal politics or municipality, yes, there's urban politics, urban interventions, monuments, but what is also very strong is that how those municipalities work with local actors, work with NGOs, work with the chamber, the room, like mimarlar odası, the architects chambers, the unions are also, these are the organizations and institutions that support that from the bottom-up movements. So when we look at here, Minnesota, what's going on in Minnesota, and what's going on in New York, one can also see and observe, at least I do, the power of, or here, how the rise of unions in the Bay Area are also very much gaining a big support. And that's what we are seeing, how the mayors are coming in front in many of these political mobilizations.
Thank you so much for this wonderful talk. I was curious to get your thoughts on something that might be beyond the scope of your paper, or your book. But if you want to just talk about Turkey, that's fine. But more generally, as a scholar of urban studies, if we imagine these states have apex cities and second cities, is the wiggle room more or less in an apex city versus a second city? So if Diyarbakır is kind of a secondary city, do we see that actually people have more wiggle room using your conceptual framework, or less wiggle room than you would find in a larger, more focal urban center?
I wouldn't call where wiggle room would find itself in a secondary city, but what I would say that it all depends on the actors. It all depends on their political activism and how they find a space. But to answer the question, if I had to choose APEC or the secondary city, I would choose the secondary city. Because in the context of Turkey, but Diyarbakır is not a secondary city, I must say, for Kurds, but Diyarbakır has been a city where there was always a space for flexibility or bending the law. So that is the ability to bend the law or find a loophole in the law gave that wiggle room, gave that opportunity for wiggle room. But so in the cities where law is so rigid, where the actors would not find a loophole in the law or urban law, that wiggle room would not flourish.
There's another question. Did you want to ask a question? I'm sorry, I don't know. This gentleman in the front. Would you like to? Okay. Jamie.
Thanks. Thank you so much for the talk. This is just fascinating. Can you talk a little bit about how space, if there's been more room for memorials, other spaces of mobilization since 2016, if there's not in the immediate phase probably, but more recently?
I can only speak until 2023 because I haven't visited the city after 2023. I am hoping to go back, but no. Unfortunately, no. Because when I visited after 2023, these arrests and these military and political interventions have been so harsh on people that the people that I have been interviewing withdraw a little bit themselves from the politics. And because there's a reality, and maybe it would be so out of my scope to tell this, but this is my sincere observation that I want to share with you. I came to think that activism, in order to be involved in political mobilization and activism, you have to have a little bit of money, like in your pocket, or you should be able to bring bread to your family. These people who used to be the mayor, or who used to be the planners, architects, were like literally almost start in a way, I'm telling, because they were fired, but also they were the ones I'm talking, they were not able to escape to exile. They were not able to go to Europe. They had to stay in the city. They have families, they have children. And the urban planner I was talking about, that the head of the urban planning department of Turkey, with 1.5 million people, he wanted to open an architectural firm. Nobody gave him a job because of his ties with the political party. So he says, you know what, I have to grow beard so nobody would recognize me, so I could find some job. Now he's better. The other one, for instance, I am citing the same example, so we are familiar with the head of the cultural affairs. Nobody hired him. He wanted to work as a teacher in a school. They didn't want to hire him, not to affiliate with him. And he worked in a pajama store the last time I was interviewed. So this intervention is something very impactful. So, but where I see some development and hope is not on monuments and memorials, it will take time. But some NGOs, they are still very active, local NGOs and unions, they are very active, as much as they can. Architecture unions, the construction engineering unions, and they are doing all they want, all they wanted to do in a very limited way, but very, very micro involvements, and which is very valuable. Like artists, they have little unions. We still some see like movies, but in that big scale of sculpture and installation, we don't see.
Thank you for the talk. I also really enjoyed listening to this. I think if I didn't misunderstand what you were saying, there was a kind of expansion or like a really strong growth in these memorials around 2015, 2016. Is that right? Or?
No, it began from 1999, from the moment that they were able to gain local powers. What's happening? It was almost the apex, the peak of this memorialization, because over the years they developed their creativity. Over the years they developed their ties with the local artists. So you can say the trajectory began with 1999, was going towards more in 2014.
Okay, yeah. So, I'm just struck by the, 2015, 2016, that's sort of the collapse of the peace process. And so I was thinking in the middle of that, there's, as that peace process is falling apart, that there's I don't know if this is, maybe I'm wrong then, that there's a growth in the number of these memorials that are taking place? Or?
If I tell where it ended by May 2015 or June, July, August 2015. After August 2015, almost nothing.
So it does, like, the end of this whole thing corresponds with the collapse of the peace process.
Yes, if you are talking about the memorial landscape of the city.
Yeah, okay. And so then it seems like in the case of Diyarbakır, this kind of municipalism, this municipality, focused politics, seems like it has very kind of concrete conditions of possibility. That there is a certain, from the 2000s into the first half of the 2010s, there is a growth of the Kurdish political movement that has not, that corresponds generally to kind of expansion or opening in the space of possibility of Kurdish politics more generally. And when that collapses, it kind of reaches its apex with the peace process, and then kind of very dramatically this kind of shut down or violently pulled apart. So I don't know if you have anything to say about like like thinking about municipalism or this kind of form of politics, its conditions of possibility, as something that not only persisted at one point but could persist. Like under what conditions can it exist, and under what conditions is this sort of like under what circumstances will we look at that as kind of a historical moment that had its moment and it's no longer. I don't know if that's too strongly stated, but.
Yeah, it is hard to say that, like as a statement, to say municipalism can exist under these conditions. But the book, at the end of the book, I also discuss that there is something called military intervention, war, municipalism can, I don't think, and I don't want to make this big statement, I'm not a statement person, but cannot exist under these war and strong military conditions. There should be a sense of, it's a wrong word maybe, sense of still a democracy, sense of still opportunity to locally elect some people. When that opportunity is gone, I don't know if it is correct to call democracy or not, because it's a big buzzword nowadays, democracy. But it is not possible to talk about municipalism. Under strong authoritarian regimes, it is not very possible. Under military intervention, it's not very possible to talk about municipal regimes. So I believe in order for that big room exist or the municipalism would exist under some type of democracy, non-authoritarian conditions should exist.
Actually, this is a very interesting conversation. The Kurdish experience in the East actually created a model for the Republican People's Party to think about local elections more strategically. And when we look, 2024, I mean, it was very much like trying to create these coalition that can elect an opposition candidate. It was very much based on that localism and municipalism that I think Kurds figured out. And also I think what is really interesting to the period that you're looking, the process was very destructive for Kurdish political movement, but it also was very destructive for Turkish political opposition to Recep Tayyip Erdogan, in a sense that when you identify a lot of Kurdish politicians as terrorists, and remember this was the period where the opposition party in certain places and the main opposition party in certain places was acting with the Kurdish groups, right? It was in a way to destroy that coalition that started from 2014, 2016. So it's a local story, it's very important, but it's also important in the sense of thinking about why Turkey is still authoritarian. And I very much agree with you, municipalism is a great wiggle room. I love the concept, and I think it can be used both in the secondary and the apex cities like Istanbul had created a huge wiggle room for the opposition, right? Ankara, Izmir, Adana, all those cities. But then when the coercion of the state comes, then there's not much to do to the municipalities. But I mean, just this is all to ask you another question, which is maybe linking back to what Deniz was saying about what this experience left to the Kurdish political movement. And when we think of today, they have, we're going through another peace process, and they have their municipalities. Like, how does this period of emancipation plus the period of coercion, and then now there's another moment, right? What's happening? I mean, I know your book doesn't really bring it to today, but can you give us some idea of the practices within these municipalities? What happened to those people, the city planners? Are they back to their jobs?
Yeah, two things. But before also, I must say that Erdogan also came to power through municipalism in Turkey. So Erdogan was a mayor of Istanbul, and he was a very successful in his own way. That's how he get popular. He became popular, and after that he was able to take over the party, and after that he was become the prime minister, and he's on and on and on. He is there. So this concept of municipalism is not only unique to Kurdish, but Kurdish parties took it into another level. They showed us also how under the state coercion to find loopholes, wiggle rooms, creativity, and to struggle against the government. This is something that they learned. So when you ask me how these past experiences transform today, their learnings, they learned very well urban strategies and municipal strategies like political strategies and urban strategies to struggle against the AKP, to finding the loopholes in the law. But that was so interesting also, I must say that the game on the urban law, it's not something that we should oversight. First of all, when Erdogan and the Erdogan's party, AKP, they were so well in the country, they did everything to decentralize the state, to put the power to municipalities. Once they begin to see, and it is happening from 2002, once they begin to see how the Kurds in the southeast are using those municipal emancipatory powers in their own game, they begin to tie the ropes and they change the law. So it's very common in Turkey. They constantly change the urban law, the municipal law. That's how it is. But what is also a learning, a strategy is Kurdish mayors learn so well how AKP Erdogan can tie the municipal and local law. As a strategy, they turn their attention to private companies. So they begin to create alignments with private companies, like private companies supporting the city theater, private companies supporting a restoration project. And they told also to me this as an explicit strategy to see once there's a government crackdown, they cannot touch those private companies. So I may say, ironic here, the private companies are always no in our field. They destroy. But in that sense, it worked. It has been working. So they give them a space for freedom, because they told me, well, when there is a government crackdown, they can arrest, they can cut their budget, but they cannot touch very explicitly to that private company. It is also another creativity that I must say that while, for instance, the squatter settled, municipality was trying to keep the squatter settlements in Sur, they were doing every effort to modernize the rest of the city. And one can also argue that, the mayors were supporting neoliberal urban developments for the rest of the city, opening a shopping mall, changing the zoning rules for more construction for gated communities. They did that too. We must also acknowledge they did that. But while they're also treatment to that, also because I interviewed, made the Diyarbakırians think that they can have a city like Istanbul. This is what in one of my interviews, they were telling, we prove ourselves, we are proving ourselves, we are not those secondary or third city or a rural environment. We prove ourselves that we can administer ourselves and we can be Istanbul. Yes, this has a lot of its conundrums. acknowledge that. But if you look in one way, this is how also genuinely the locals thought. Like they were not, okay, we are opening shopping malls, this is terrible for our city. No, they were welcoming those malls. They were saying, yeah, we can also have malls like Istanbul. We don't need to go to Istanbul to shop. They were celebrating. And this is one of the things about also the scholarship. There is no black and white in our scholarship that we can say, oh, this is bad, this is good.
There's a question back there.
Yeah, you very nicely, told us about the shutting down of the creativity and all these Kurdish memorials around 2015. But I'm just wondering, I was in Diyarbakır during this peace process period, and I saw a lot of things like funerals, Kurdish funerals, which were openly Kurdish nationalist, and Kurdish language newspapers that I never thought I would see. And everybody said, none of this would have been possible before 2013. So I'm wondering whether you can say a similar thing about the construction of all these Kurdish memorials, whether the creativity was building, but then it sort of, with the opening in 2013, it sort of exploded. And so I'm just curious whether these memorials were constructed mostly after 2013.
Honestly, yes, after 2013 there was a little bit of more space of expression, but I know that there are many Kurdish newspapers who were already there before 2013. I don't see, or I didn't observe 2013 as a threshold, honestly. And I know there was those new Kurdish newspapers were everywhere in the municipality. And also the major monuments and memorials that I see was already there in 2008, 9, 10. So
Maybe a visibility.
Visibility, yes.
Because of the peace process.
Yes, of course, that peace process brought more freedom for expression, but in terms of newspapers, in terms of monuments, memoirs, they were already there.
No, we have more time if you want to ask.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. It was really, really rich, and it filled in lots of gaps of my own. How long it's been since I've been there, but it was great to see some familiar spaces. I know your focus, it seems like your focus is on the people who are professionally engaged in planning and architectural spaces, people who see themselves as sort of responsible for designing and thinking at a kind of meta level. I wondered if as they are removed and exiled or forced to not be in power in those positions of kind of decision-making anymore, whether still some of the kind of lived experience of what the city can be, that wiggle room, the mobilization, lives on in a kind of general populace, regardless of whether the people in power are there. There are still 1.5 million people who live in Diyarbakır, who lived through, who go to who go to Koşuyolu Park, who remember the stories, who remember the war, who've lived in some of these spaces. And do you have a sense then of whether that wiggle room, or the memory of what was enabled by that wiggle room, lives on in a kind of quiet community sense that could be the seeds of future flourishing should political regimes, and they will change, or should, Belediye's return to local control? Like, do you think there's, I guess the question is like, you can't do fieldwork with 1.5 million people, but like, to the extent that you see, do you yourself see the kind of bleakness mitigated perhaps by the fact that people live there, normal people still remember what it was like to live before, during, and after this, or does that make sense? Like it's a very planner-focused
Yes.
story that you've told us so far.
This is a question that I will be like exploring genuinely this summer.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yes.
But I have been sensing, but I am still contacting, talking, and when I went there in 2023, which is 2 years ago, it depends on the generation. So I saw high school or undergrad youth, they don't know. They don't have that sentimental attachment. I saw them at Espresso Lab. They opened an Espresso Lab in Sur, by the way. It's like Espresso Lab. And but the generation who is over 30s are still remembering. But they are waiting, they are talking, they are coming together. And like the NGOs, local NGOs, even in micro level, are crucially important. And it is not something that, oh, they gained a lot and now it is all erased. No, they gained a lot, even though it is not, they are not right now actively involved. I think it can easily come back again because they learned a lot in terms of all these strategies. Yeah, but I also observed something. So when in the past, before the elections, I was always in the city, and when I was talking, there has been a tendency to be all those like local politicians or local prospectus mayors, municipal council members to be from the region. And when the last time I went there, they are either from Ankara or Eskişehir. And I asked, like, why this is the case? Like, why they are from, and this is literally because, like, one of the main reasons they are lacking people because they are all even in exile or in the prison. So, yeah.
One more here.
Okay, one last question.
From the point of linguistic landscape, how much the city changed? You mentioned before, like for example, the street naming, the park naming, the language dominance. How much could you comment on that? And also maybe like just the influence, maybe the seeds of the next generation. We could often see that starts with like with the unofficial signage or graffiti, right? On the streets, if you can see any of these.
That's the first thing. They rechanged the names of the streets. They did not, the only urban intervention was not destruction of the monuments, and they rechanged it, and this time with very Islamist history, like, and they built a big major mosque to the city, which is like not, that architectural style of that mosque, it is in the book, but I didn't show it here. It's not Diyarbakır architecture, it's not low, it's a super like a fusion kind of architecture. Nobody goes, it is in a not very accessible space. And I went there a couple of times to see, it is even, do they go and, no, it's not very accessible. They just built it, Erdogan, it's his signature to build a city, a big mosque. And yes, and another thing that they named the streets with very Islamist figure. And right after when I went there in 2000, after the war, there was the sign of Hezbollah. It was impossible to see any signs of Hezbollah in the city. Impossible. It's not the Lebanese Hezbollah I'm talking about. It's the local. And all the organizations were like, okay, were the Kurdish festivals replace themselves with some religious festivals, the Day for Prophet Muhammad celebration, and they are very invented also festivals. Like you don't even see those in the religious neighborhoods of Istanbul, let me say. And what is interesting, I must also add that there were a lot of powerful NGOs that the Kurdish municipality established for women's organizations. They did not shut them down, they replaced them. So AKP was also very strategic about that. They did not shut down, they replaced them. They also appointed qayyums to that NGOs. Like, how do you appoint qayyums? Okay, appoint qayyum to mayors, but they also appointed, because they also knew that they are very powerful in terms of articulation, political articulation in the society.
Do people use the new street names, or do they still just say, like, we're going, I mean, that would be, I feel like, an interesting question, is like, in the colloquial every day, in addition to, I think, that, like, when you say you're gonna meet your friends, like, that, like, how much do those names feel, or are they commented on as, like, oh, fake? Do people roll their eyes, or do they just matter of fact use them like that? It's interesting.
I think it is early to answer this question.
Yeah.
I
Let us all go.
I can't answer this question. It is early. I have to go.
But it seems ethnographically interesting.
Yes.
In Ankara we don't.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
And or like people say, and they like roll their eyes, like, oh, are we gonna go to the, you know, there's like kind of meta commentary in the subtle spaces.
I think it takes time for those things. When the names change, it takes like at least 10 years or so. I mean, many examples from Ankara. So we'll see.
This reminded me one little thing. I was interviewed with a cab driver constantly, is one of mine. But it was before 2015. And Osman Baydevi gave a new name to a new major road. But among the taxi drivers, they were using the old names, not the name that the Osman Baydevi, the pro-Kurdish road. So that's reminded me, but for the after AKP intervention, I must study.
This is a super interesting conversation. I'm sure we could have more questions, but our time's up. Thank you so much, Muna, for sharing your book with us.